It's 20th of January 2022. Greetings from Rwanda's capital Kigali. Here is what makes our top stories tonight. Ahead of the first ever Africa Protected Areas Congress in March this year, Environment Minister Dr. Jean-D'Arc Mujawamariya has reassured participants that the country is ready to host a safe and successful inaugural APC amidst COVID-19.
The Court of Appeals has begun hearing the case against Paul Rusesabagina and other members of the MRCD-FLN faction who were convicted of terrorism-related offences.
And some of the drivers that use speed governor say that they are concerned about network issues which lead to disconnection of the device. A very good evening to you and welcome to Rwanda Television News. My name is Sam Kalisa.
And my name is Martina Evera.
Hi Martina.
I'm very good. How are you doing?
Very great.
All right.
And of course, as we kick it off, ahead of the first ever Africa Protected Areas Congress in March this year, Environment Minister Dr. Jean-D'Arc Mujawamariya has reassured participants that the country is ready to host a safe and successful inaugural APC amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. This landmark conservation forum aims to position Africa's protected areas within the broader goals of sustainable development and community well-being. Ethan Tashobia kickstarts tonight's bulletin with this report.
The Africa Protected Areas Congress, APAC, is the first ever continent-wide gathering of African leaders, citizens and interest groups that will convene from March 7th to 12th, 2022 in Kigali. In a run-up event to the Congress, the government of Rwanda, Africa Wildlife Foundation and the International Union for Conservation of Nature on Thursday unveiled 3 former African heads of state as patrons of the Congress. According to the officials, these former leaders have shown their political will and passion to continue to preserve the environment and protect wildlife. They include former President of Niger, Mamadou Issouf, former President of Botswana, Festus Mogae, and Haile Mariam Desalegn, the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia. In his acceptance speech, Haile Mariam explains why the political will of African leaders is fundamental in ensuring that biodiversity is preserved.
Global scientists already predict that under a business-as-usual scenario, we could lose as much as 60% of the area currently set aside for conservation on the continent. Therefore, we must turn this situation around. But we can. Yes, we can. We have in this moment the opportunity to invest in the areas we have set aside as the backbone of natural infrastructure that underpins the aspirations we have set out in Agenda 2063 of the African Union Commission.
The African continent has about 700 protected areas, but they have not been efficiently managed. Environmentalists believe that interstate relations and their partners should take lead in conserving these protected areas in the interest of the people both now and in the future.
We should also remember that the good strategies are not enough. At the African Wildlife Foundation, our mission dictates that the future of wildlife and wildlands in a modern Africa can only be firmly hinged on ensuring that conservation agenda links to the aspirations and mindsets driving change on this continent. As an organization that recently clocked 60 years, we intuitively know and can confidently say that conservation success relies on African leadership.
The summit is set to take place at a time when the world is grappling with COVID-19 pandemic. Environment Minister Dr. Jean-D'Arc Mujawamariya has reassured participants that the country is ready to host a safe and successful inaugural APAC amidst this pandemic.
Concerning the COVID-19 measures, Rwanda is ready. Rwanda is ready and prepared to have a safe environment, a safe Congress. This is not the first meeting we are having, the first big conference we are having during COVID. We had even a big conference during COVID, even before we got vaccines. And now, more than 40% of our population is vaccinated. I want really to assure the people who want to join us during the APAC 2022, that there is safety regarding COVID-19. We are vaccinating people, we are testing, we have a very good testing capacity.
The week-long Africa Protected Areas Congress, which is expected to open on March 7th, 2022, it will be a hybrid gathering, the first meeting of its kind on the continent, to provide a forum for African countries to address the role of protected areas in conserving nature and share ideas on how to sustainably mobilize at least $700 million funds needed every year to safeguard Africa's iconic wildlife. Reporting for RwandaTV News, Ethan Tashobia.
Now, still on the inaugural Africa Protected Areas Congress, our colleague Ethan Tashobia sat down for an interview with the CEO of Africa Wildlife Foundation, Kadu Sebunya, to expound more on the significance of the meeting and what it means for Africa's renewed conservation efforts. He started by asking Sebunya how the three former African heads of state, Haile Mariam Desalegn, former Prime Minister for Ethiopia, Isufu Mahamadou, former President of Niger, and His Excellency Festus Mogae, former President for Botswana, were selected as patrons for the upcoming inaugural IUCN Africa Protected Areas Congress. The Court of Appeal. Yes, so let's take a look.
These are three individuals that have walked the talk. I just happen to be a friend and I've worked with them on a number of issues. Africa, I've visited them in their countries post their presidency. We've looked at what they've done as president, as decisions made, and how they moved the needle in terms of this area, the influence they have on the continent, the networks they've built over time, and what they've achieved. But I think the most important thing is the passion. These three individuals, you've seen them here, and some of those who are not here. The passion, President Haile Mariam, we talked about his passion for environment, what he has done, what he brings on the table. Explains that. I've been to some of their villages and the work they are carrying out today post-presidency. Prime Minister Haile Mariam is in Ethiopia doing great work on supporting communities improve their livelihoods based on natural resources, whether it's agriculture, whether it's the tourism industry, whether it's managing wildlife on their land and how they benefit. That is his passion. And the connection to environment. Actually, he chairs the Board of Tourism Board, from presidency to the chair of the Tourism Board of Ethiopia. It's a demonstrated passion. I've been to Niger, talking with President Yusuf. He invited me to his village. He has done great work. His village is part of the desert, coming desert. Desertification has impacted his village. He was telling me, growing up as a young man, he would see giraffes and buffaloes in his village. Now you can't even see a tree in his village, other than the trees he has just planted. He's planted over millions of trees with community efforts in his village. And my last visit, I remember vividly, I was talking to an elderly lady in his village who told me it's for the first time the last 2 years that his village had a water basin. Botswana, President Moai, you know what Botswana is. It's one of the leading countries, conservation countries in Africa, having almost more than 200,000 elephants. The biggest herd of elephants is found in this country. They've done conservation very well. The tourism industry is very, very healthy. In fact, the tourism industry in Botswana supports it's the biggest employer of rural communities, especially women. So there are examples and models these leaders have taken on, and they've shown what needs to be done and what needs to be more. But for me, the biggest appreciation for them is the passion and the time and the voluntary. They're volunteers to us.
So let's talk about between now and March, when the Congress is happening, what will be their job, and probably after that?
Mobilization. There is a reason why we chose these three. Apart from what I've just explained, you note that they are all former leaders. What we need for conservation sector here to change the narrative is political will. In the next 10 years, we really need a huge mobilization of African leaders around the conservation sector. We need to improve the relationship, our leaders, especially the decisions they're making on our economic growth, national development plans, to start factoring in natural resources. This conference needs that political will in order to mobilize the continent in the short term. In the long term, we need to mobilize ourselves, especially the young people, in implementation of one of the recommendations we'll get from this. Without young people, we are dead in the water. 70% of us, of the continent, is young.
Now, this Congress is happening for the very first time in Africa, for the very first time in Rwanda. After so many years, one would want to ask, well, have been our priorities, the priorities of leaders over these past years, that especially in the conservation conversation?
It's really sad. And every time I say this is the first time Africa is going to talk about protected areas, I shiver, because why did it take us so long? I think it's lack of understanding the role of protected areas in our existence on this continent. And I think the biggest challenge has been from the conservation fraternity itself. Conservation, how it was introduced, protected areas, how they were formed. Many times we kicked Africans off land to form these protected areas. The way, the relationship between Africans and protected areas is not, it's very economically, is not as great. Even the industry that supports almost 70% of these protected areas, that's tourism. The way it's designed for international arrivals, not so much for Africans. And the industry itself, most of it is run by very few Africans involved. So we don't have anything from the conservation sector that we can talk about that really connects Africans to the industry itself. Even the voices. You hear non-Africans telling Africans why elephants are important. There are very few African voices, even in the sector. So the issue is not so much about decisions Africans have made, but how conservation also sector has behaved on this continent. That needs to change. But also, Africans, we've completely outsourced. So the problem is not for those who are helping us actually to conserve. The problem is that we have accepted that, and we have outsourced almost the entire sector to the international community. So this conference is about to address, why did this happen? What do we need to do? What works? But also, what is the reason for protected areas? Why are they useful? What's their contribution? We have about 8,000 plus. Do we need all of them? Which ones are very, very important for our survival? Which ones can we actually get rid of?
Mr. Kadu Sebunya, the CEO of Africa Wildlife Foundation, many thanks for your time.
Thank you to Tashabia for that informative interview. And moving ahead, South Africa Chief of Defense Forces General Rudzani Mapwanya and Mozambican Deputy Chief of Defense Forces Lieutenant General Bertolino Jerme Capitaine on Wednesday visited Rwanda Security Forces base in Mocimboa de Praia, Cabo Delgado province in Mozambique. The delegation, which also included Major General Solani Monkai of the SADC mission in Mozambique, SAMIM, Force Commander and other senior officers from the SANDF, SAMIM, and Mozambican Armed Forces FADM was received by the Joint Task Force Commander Major General Innocent Kabandana, accompanied by the Rwanda Defense Rwanda security forces of senior officers in Mozambique, headquarters at the Masimboa, the Praia. According to the statement from RDF, Major General Kamandana appreciated the existing collaboration and cooperation between all forces in the operations and that have enabled the achievement of some good results. He reiterated the need to plan and conduct joint offensive operations to dismantle the main terrorist base in Chai, Mosamia, and others in Pundari and Nicha, the Ruvuma in Mozambique. In his remarks, the Chief of South African Defence Force, General Rudzani Mapwanya, said that the purpose of his tour to Mozambique was to visit Samim troops deployed in the Cabo Delgado province and take the opportunity to visit the Rwanda Security Forces leadership, who are also deployed for the same mission in Cabo Delgado. General Mapwanya commended the cooperation between the forces in the operations, namely RSF, FADM and Samim, and urged commanders on ground to sustain existing good collaboration in a bid to defeat the terrorist remnants in Cabo Delgado. This would ensure the continuous return of the population to their homes and support them to revive socio-economic activities, thus paving way for long-lasting peace. The South African Chief of Defence Forces, who is also the chairman of the SADC Troika Chiefs of Defence, reiterated that recent SADC Chiefs of Defence meeting recommended the addition of resources to Samim, which will enhance the forces' operations capacity. He also noted the need for joint planning and expeditious execution of joint operations in order to defeat terrorists reported in various areas of Mozambique. Over to you, Martina.
Yes, on to other matters. The Court of Appeals has begun hearing the case against Paul Rusesabagina and other members of the MRCD-FLN faction who were convicted of terrorism-related offences. The court is currently hearing the appeal of the prosecution, some convicted seeking reduced sentences, and the civil parties seeking compensation. Innocent Mugabo with more.
The Court of Appeal held that the prosecution had appealed against the title of the crime, the offences which the High Court had not upheld against the defendants, and the penalties imposed by the prosecution, arguing that it was inconsistent with the provisions of the law. And for the convicts that appealed include those who were not satisfied with the sentence, those who pleaded guilty and were not commuted, those who were convicted of non-proven offences, among other cases. All these were given the opportunity to explain their grievances related to the ruling of the High Court made in September last year. Civil parties seeking compensation appealed expressing dissatisfaction with the way compensations were determined. There are also those who aren't given compensation due to lack or insufficient evidence, appealed the court to hear from witnesses of what happened. Compensation litigation is scheduled for Wednesday next week. As for the name of the crime, the prosecution took the stand, explaining that the trial court had ruled that Paul Rusesabagina, Nsabimana Calixte aka Sankara, and Nzeimana Malk never participated in carrying out any terrorism attacks, but participated in the planning, arguing that a paragraph of the law had been ignored, which explained that the law stipulates that the leader of a terrorist group or one who incites others to commit terrorism and other related offences is punished as a perpetrator. It was here that Calixte Nsabimana was called to the stand and noted that he doesn't believe a spokesperson of an armed group should be accused and imprisoned for the acts done by the militants at a time he had not joined the force when he was still in Comoros. His lawyer, Rugeyo Jean, further added that his client pleaded guilty and requests that his sentence be reduced. For the offences in which the defendants were acquitted, such as the creation of a terrorist group, the prosecution alleges that the court failed to properly analyze the clause of acquittal, where 13 defendants, including Paul Rusesabagina, Calixte Nsabimana, and Helman Sengimana, were acquitted of this crime. The prosecution finds that the court would have ruled based on the cases decided in 2016 rather than on the previous ones, hence finding it reasonable that Nsabimana Calixte, Rusesabagina Paul, Sengimana Malk and Bizimana Kassier be convicted of creating a militia group and 9 others be convicted of joining a militia group. For the case of funding terrorism that Paul Rusesabagina was acquitted, the prosecution finds that the charges against him are consistent with the provisions of the Penal Code. The court ruled that anyone to be convicted of this crime should be an outsider, and the prosecution finds it necessary for this conviction to also apply to the group's founder, as the law states. The court also convicted Paul Rusesabagina of fundraising for the MLCD-FLN, but did not convict him of sponsoring terrorism. This is where the prosecution calls for both acts to be treated as two related offenses with the same motive of creating a terrorist group and sponsoring terrorism. This appeal hearing is happening in the absence of Paul Rusesabagina and his lawyers, with all his co-accused present. The next hearing is scheduled for Monday next week. Innocent Mugabo, RTV News.
Thank you, Innocent, for the story. Moving ahead, some of the drivers that use Speed Governor say they are concerned about network issues, which leads to disconnection of this device. They say that when it is disconnected, the traffic police penalize them with a fine of 200,000 Rwandan francs for exceeding speed, thinking they disconnected the Speed Governor intentionally. Olive Tente has the report.
The use of Speed Governor in public transport and freight vehicles is one of the main factors that reduced road accidents that were on a higher rate due to the high speed of the drivers. However, some of the drivers that use these Speed Governors say that whenever there is network issue, it leads to the disconnection of these devices, which sometimes leads to penalties, and it affects them financially.
For example, we often have a network problem when we get to Ngororero, which is where the problem I had happened. I was driving passengers as usual. While I was driving, the policeman stopped me and told me that I was driving too fast. My car was clocking 55 kilometers per hour. They penalized me with a fine of 200,000 Rwandan francs and ordered me to pay the money immediately. They penalized me 4 times, which results into a fine of 800,000 Rwandan francs. The company deducts that amount from my salary, and this affects my family. For example, if they deduct 30,000 Rwandan francs each month, it is almost impossible for me to save. This leads to different effects that affects my family.
Pascal Technology, one of the companies that provide those Speed Governors, notes that the Speed Governor is used to reduce the speed and the GPS is used in tracking the vehicle. The Chief Executive Officer of this company, Pascal Ndizeye, explains about the report of the penalized vehicles.
Yesterday I gave a report to the traffic police of 600 cars that have been penalized, and each car pays a fine of 200,000 Rwandan francs, which resulted into 120 million Rwandan francs.
The Director General of the Rwanda Utilities Regulatory Authority, Dr. Ernest Nsabimana, clarifies the issue.
Sometimes the Speed Governor gets network issues or even be offline for a while. Often when it is offline, the issue may be from the GPS or the SIM card. Sometimes the drivers also disconnect these Speed Governors, or it loses network because of the mountains where the car passes. But when it comes back online, it shows everything. Most of the times drivers claim that they have been penalized, but there is a technical team involving RURA and the Rwanda National Police that supervises those activities. And if you are penalized, that team analyzes the issue and it is resolved without wrongly penalizing drivers.
To date, Pascal Technology owns 60% of the Speed Governor and GPS used in public transport and freight in Rwanda. Olive Nete, reporting for RTV News.
Thank you, Olive, for the story. Now, with just 10 days to the deadline for declaration and payment of property tax, the Rwanda Revenue Authority has warned taxpayers to pay property tax before the time limit to avoid penalties. Participation in declaration and payment of property tax is less than 15%.
Across the country, residents are rushing against the deadline to declare and pay property tax, rental income tax, and trading license tax. Taxpayers say they will complete on time because they are aware of the consequences of not paying before the set time limit. We already paid tax. When you pay tax early, you do your work with no worry of penalties. Paying tax at the last minute is a problem because there is a lot of congestion that might delay you and you face penalties in the end. On the other hand, some say that they are waiting to pay towards the deadline because they have not yet gotten the money, while others have chosen to invest the money so that it can bring them returns. Property taxpayers were given an extension of a 1-month period on the time they were supposed to have paid the tax from December 31st, 2021 to January 31st, 2022. However, participation in paying the tax is still low. The Deputy Commissioner for Regions and Decentralized Taxes at the Rwanda Revenue Authority, Ernest Karasira, urged residents not to wait for the deadline or exceed the time limit provided, so as to avoid penalties.
bamenyekanisha ndetse banishyure yewe harwo tubagira inama tukavuga ngo aho kugira ngo tugereze umunsi wa nyuma ujye kumenyekanisha unishyure.
They need to declare and pay the tax. We always advise them not to wait for the deadline. You can rather declare and pay later, but not later than the due date. In our analysis, we have found that many people wait to pay the tax in the last days, even if we use technology. But when people wait to pay on the last minute, there is a lot of traffic. And that is why some pay and others don't. Apparently, the participation is still low. At some point, it has reached 30% and 40% in other areas. But where it is still very low is for property tax. Property taxpayers are 1 million in total. Trading license taxpayers are more than 400,000, while rental income taxpayers are 36,000 in total. The Rwanda Development Bank, BRD, and its partners in the initiative named China Challenge announced that the program continues to attract Rwandans of all walks of life, promising that the initiative exceed the intended target of providing solar home systems to 10,000 families in the first Ubudehe category. On this Thursday, one of the families in Kabigondo village, Gahengeri sector in Rwamagana district, was provided with a solar home system under the China Challenge, which was launched a month ago in collaboration with the Rwanda Development Bank, BRD, and individuals who decided to provide power to 10,000 homes across the country that had never received electricity. The organizers of the initiative say they have already received funding for 8,000 households, with 532 households to be provided with electricity in the Eastern Province. Gasana Emmanuel, the governor of the Eastern Province, said on Thursday that it would help them quickly achieve the goal that by 2024 the entire population would have access to electricity in their homes, as they have now reached over 70% of all households. Under this initiative, a person who wants to participate in China Challenge will pay 15,000 Rwandan francs, and the Rwanda Development Bank, BRD, will immediately add 100,000 Rwandan francs, instantly providing an opportunity to connect a poor household to solar power. BRD Chief Executive Officer Kameta Sayinzoga told RBA that in addition to public and private institutions, including commercial banks, individuals and even foreigners are participating in the program. So it is expected that more than 10,000 households will initially get electricity in their homes.
Still on the local scene, Huye district residents point out the issue of parents who don't properly monitor their children's behavior and the issue of poverty in families are the main reasons for increased school dropout. They stress the need for cooperation between parents and other relevant authorities in solving the problem at hand. Of the two schools we visited, the Rugango Secondary School located in Bazi sector in Huye district and the Sovu Secondary School located in Huye sector, a total of 60 students dropped out. Some residents say that this is largely due to parents who do not care about their children's behaviors, but also the problem of poverty among families. There are times a parent has many children, for instance 4. We pay 2,000 francs for each child, and getting 8,000 francs every term becomes difficult. Principals of the schools we visited noted that they collaborate with different authorities to bring the children back to school, but that some of the children who dropped out of school are no longer living in their home areas. Some of our students did not return to school due to various reasons, as they had spent a long time at home. We came to find out that some of them got jobs, whilst others are still in their homes due to various reasons in their families, some of which resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic. In the Gako market located in Huye sector, a week-long campaign to get children that dropped out back to schools was launched. In the market, some children are selling a variety of items, others are walking around the market. Some say they dropped out of school to find school equipment, whilst others admit that they did not return to school in this term. Kanyesha Anosiata, Huye Deputy Mayor for Social Welfare, noted that in addressing the issue of school dropouts, the district administration plans to work with all relevant authorities, especially grassroots local authorities. This 7-day campaign will be carried out door to door, because when we tell them just from here, they don't do it. We know them from their home, as we are partnering with grassroots local authorities and teachers. We are also working with children in this area so that they can sensitize their peers and help us monitor the issue. In Huye district, a total of 1,832 children are believed to have dropped out of school.
And on behalf of the entire news and technical team that made it happen, thank you very much for being with us. My name is Sam Kalisa.
And my name, Martina Herrera.
Have a good evening.
And stay safe.
Bye.